Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm reviewing the new edition of a book we've reviewed on many occasions. It's a very important book for anyone who's a practitioner in personal injury actions, dealing with quantum. The book is the Judicial College Guidelines for the Assessment of General Damages in Personal Injury Cases. Now I'm reviewing this in February 2020. The book arrived at Christmas. It was a little bit delayed. It's now in its 15th edition and it's been compiled by a number of people: Mrs. Justice Lambert, Peter Carson, Stuart McKechnie, Queen's Counsel, Stephen Snowden, Queen's Counsel, and Richard Wilkinson. And this year, for this edition, the foreword is being written by the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Burnett of Maldon. And Oxford University Press are to be thanked for continuing to produce this work. I believe it's the premier work in its particular area. It makes life so much easier for all the practitioners. That includes the judge, the parties involved, and of course the legal people, the barristers and solicitors. It gives a much better idea when you're trying to assess quantum. You look at the medical report and then you look at these guidelines and you should be able to get a very good indication of what the correct level should be for damages. They're not very large amounts of damages, generally speaking, but it's a first-class book and one we use regularly. Obviously it's in all main courts. Here it is, little paperback. There's the front. There's the spine. You probably can't see very much on the spine. Then there's some blurb on the back. And very much the standard form again. It runs to 92 pages. There's an index at the back. So you should find what you're looking for concerning the actual injury. And then if we go to the front, there's the front page there. And the main front page, which you can see there. And then after that, you've got some blurb from OUP. Then you've got the contents section. That really sets out the various heads that you might be looking for. I tend to use one particular area a lot, which is orthopaedic injuries, because that's been the area I've generally been involved in, although I have had tripping cases and a whole range of other matters to look at. You can see that's the end of the actual index. Then you've got the foreword by the Lord Chief Justice, well worth reading because he sets out very important points about this new edition. Then you've got the original foreword from Lord Donaldson when the book first came out, and then of course you've got an introduction now to what the Judicial College does. It used to be called the Judicial Studies Board, but it's now called the Judicial College, and you can see from that that's actually written by Christina Lambert, that's Mrs. Justice Lambert, and it actually sets out where they are at the moment. These books I think are very, very important. There's a note about the 10% uplift which can be applied, and it explains exactly where that comes from. And then there's also a note on what are called multiple injuries, where in fact again one is trying to look at the assessment overall. Then you can see how the book is structured. You've got the detail there, and then on that side you have the actual figures, and that's the way it runs through. And your shaded areas give you an indication. The lighter shaded area is the figure, and then the uplift is the darker shaded area, and that's the way it runs all the way through. And as I say, the area that I've been heavily involved in has been orthopaedic injuries, which is now chapter 7 of the guidelines. They are important because they obviously cover, for instance, you can see that this is whiplash and a lot of RTA cases. And at the back you've got things like chronic pain, very useful. And I did in fact recently use it for a number of other matters concerning facial injuries. There's the book anyway, and a very good book it is too. I hope we're going to get more of these books in the future because it does make life a lot easier. What do we say then? Well, Elizabeth was the lead writer. I asked her to do the review, the first part of the review, excuse me, this time, mainly because I've done so many of them and it's always nice to have a different approach. So she said, what price, pain and suffering? Because that really is what this is about. Note the judicial guidelines for all those involved in PI actions. And one of the most common and assuredly the most difficult tasks in cases of personal injury is the assessment of damages. How does one assign a monetary value which will compensate those who have suffered pain or loss of life amenities resulting from personal injury. Obviously loss of life is slightly different in the sense, but it's loss of life amenities we're actually talking about here, because obviously there's the Fatal Injuries Act for specific matters involving death. Obviously, because every case is different, there are no rules as such, but there are guidelines, notably these set out in what I think is an indispensable guide from the Judicial College, published by OUP. It's the 15th and the latest edition of what is actually a slim paperback. It's a volume which you'll find in all courtrooms, basically. They are there, and it's the first thing that the judge goes to. And since the first edition came out in 1992, it has become a must-have and a vital tool for anybody involved professionally in PI cases. And we're pointed out by Christina Lambert, Mrs. Justice Lambert, in the introduction to the guide, that it's an erudite and it's an energetic editorial team that she has, who have undertaken all the hard work of reviewing relevant reported decisions, which means that in most cases you won't have to. And can I say here, just going away from the review a bit, in reality today a lot of the case law is helpful, but it is down to the guidelines and the medical reports, because every case is individual. And that's really the test. And I hope that many practitioners will recognise that that actually is how we do it. Although obviously the case law can be very helpful. The trouble is it does get out of date, even with current law cases which we can use. And of course what the guide intends to do, and has always intended to do, was summarised by Lord Donaldson in his foreword into the first edition, when he says, what the book does admirably is to distill the conventional wisdom contained in the reported cases, to supplement it from the collective experience of the working party, and to present the result in a convenient, logical and coherent form. That's what you get. That's what, certainly in the lower courts where I practice, the county courts, that's what we use, and it does work. The coherence, the logic and the convenience of this book have made it accessible then to litigants in person as well as practitioners. And a particular feature of the guide is that it places virtually the full range of personal injuries under convenient categories, from, say, injuries resulting in paralysis or death, to brain and head injury, psychiatric and psychological damage, injuries affecting the senses, injuries to internal organs, orthopedic injuries, facial injuries, and chronic pain. And that really is basically the list of the chapter headings. And it also covered our minor injuries, which again I've been dealing with recently, because we shouldn't overlook the minor injuries aspect, because it's the overall picture we're trying to get. That includes things like scarring, damage to hair, as well as dermatitis and other skin conditions. And there is additionally a guidance note on assessing damages for multiple injuries, and there's the other note on the 10% uplift, which is implied in many cases. That's of course at the front of the work. And as for the amounts of damages themselves, it's noted that the figures stated in this volume for this edition have been adjusted to reflect the effects of inflation, namely increases in the RPI, the Retail Price Index, from May 2019 to June 2019. So I say the book came out at Christmas 2019, and I'm doing this recording in 2020, the early part of 2020. Other important changes discussed in the new edition include the government's reform programme on whiplash, which has had a direct effect certainly on my practice, because that's the area I use this book mainly for. It's also stated that the practical effects of the new damages tariff scheme will be a matter for judicial determination, and that's actually happening. So say the book has been edited by a working party of the Judicial College, and it's a book which is essential reading for all practitioners and parties involved in PI cases. Date of publication of the 15th edition is the 4th of December 2019. That's when it finally came out, and as I say, it's now appearing in the courts. Let's have one last look at it. There it is. That's the front of it. Then there's the spine. Then you've got the stuff at the back. You probably can't really see it because of the colour, but there's quite a lot of general information. Just opening it up in the middle. This is injuries to internal organs, asbestos-related disease. Now again, these are technical areas. There are medical reports. You can see the structure with the actual figures that are given there and there, and the detail structuring A, B and C depending on the most serious, going down to the least serious areas. And again, you've got all sorts of other things, bladder, spleen. It's all very, very substantial, and it should cover virtually everything that you need to talk about. And of course, they are guidelines, so whatever happens in the end, it's down to the judge. If you can't get some sort of agreement, and of course this book is aimed at trying to get agreement, so we don't have to go to court, we don't have to have a relatively detailed series of submissions on the actual levels of quantum. And I do believe that this actually assists because it saves judicial time in court. A very big thank you anyway to everybody concerned, and I'd like to pay a particular debt of gratitude to Oxford University Press, who continue to publish this work. It makes our lives a great deal easier, as I've indicated, and we cannot do without this sort of work. I hope we get more of this sort of publication in the future, because it will deal with one or two cases that should never really get to a court. It should be settled beforehand. Thank you to all. Bye-bye.